Um, Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Sharon Milgram, and I'm the director of the Office of Intramural Training and Education at the National Institutes of Health. And I'm talking with you today from my home in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And the topic of the workshop today is Becoming a Resilient Scientist, which is a workshop I give regularly on campus, at universities, at national meetings, but this one is really with a different spin. So I love the Great British Bake Off, and every once in a while they have the holiday edition or the family edition. So this is Becoming a Resilient Scientist, the pandemic edition. A couple of important notes. You can download both the slide deck and a workbook that goes along with the slide deck right out of the presentation, the control panel to the side. If the slides freeze on you, assume that it's bandwidth and your Wi-Fi and issues on your end. If it's issues on my end, then I'll say something and make sure everybody knows that. You have your best option is to try to just refresh your screen. Same thing if you lose audio, the first thing to try is to refresh. But if it doesn't work or you feel that you missed a part, don't worry, because right after the workshop at some point shortly thereafter, you will receive a link to watch a tape of everything. So you won't miss anything and you don't really need to worry about it. At some point, Lori Conlon, the director of the postdoc office here in the OITE, will pop in and she will give us the phone number in case your computer audio doesn't work. In the last webinar that we did last week, and we're learning from mistakes and learning from each iteration, just like all of you. But what we've learned is that some people lose computer audio, but calling in resolves everything. And for some reason, we're having a little bit of problem finding the call-in number. I am going to take questions at certain periods throughout. You can type in questions during the presentation as well, but I won't stop unless I hit what I had planned as one of my stopping points. So I want to just start the workshop. Lori, is that you?
Yeah, you need to show your slides, Sharon.
I thought I did already. So where is that?
Go to sharing at the top, and then it says show screen.
It won't. It says waiting to view, and it's show main screen is blocked out.
Oh wait, hold on. I got it. Try it.
I think you have to do it.
Yeah. Try again.
Nope.
Sorry guys. Welcome to technology. Hold on. I don't know which Elena is you and which Elena is me.
Just try both, I guess. We're doing an experiment. Each time we learn something.
Okay. Are you the presenter now?
There, I just changed it to organized presenter me. Okay, can people see it now? Can somebody from OITE let us know if they can see it?
Not yet. And they're not even seeing that the webinar has started. Okay, oh yeah, there they are. We're good now.
It says showing main screen. Okay, I think we're good.
You're good. Sorry, everybody.
All right. Just a reminder, the slides are available in the handouts panel if you want to follow along, and just refresh your screen if things freeze and you can't see anything. And I'm going to delete a whole bunch of the yes, this is working. Thank you all for helping out with this. It's just going to take me a minute. If people could stop saying yes, they can see it. Okay, so I just want to start with just one really important thing that's not related to the talk, but it is actually pretty important. This is Teo. Teo's our dog, and he looks maybe like a mellow guy right here in this picture. He certainly looks like an old guy. It sort of shocks me every time I look. Teo has no inside voice, and Teo has a bark that can fill an entire house. And Teo is really happy to have me at home and working from here. And so he's pretty close by pretty much all the time. So I'm going to apologize up front. I hope that he doesn't bark, but you are likely to hear a little bit of Teo participating in the workshop in the background. And I also, before I start, want to just give you some information from the OITE or a note from our sponsors. Our website is training.nih.gov. And if you go there, you will find archived career development videos. You'll find the OITE careers blog, which has had some outstanding blogs on stress management and wellness recently. It has always consistently great blogs on career development topics. And so I encourage you to check it out. And there's access to some other career development resources. Please go ahead and visit the website. And then I really need you to help me stay out of trouble with the OITE staff by completing our OITE Wellness Challenge. All right, each week the OITE is going to put out on Twitter and through our emails a wellness challenge, something to help you remember that while we have to work and we're all worried and we're all focused on the news, that we also have to focus on ourselves and taking care of ourselves. And this week, the challenge is to tap into your creative self and create something. A picture, a short video, your thoughts on something that you did to be creative. You should submit that picture or the video through Twitter. You can tag us at NIH_OITE, and you can also include at Sharon Milgram. And you should use the hashtag OITE Wellness Challenge. If you aren't on Twitter and want to learn Twitter, this is a good time and a great way to do it. So open an account today and make us be your first tweet. And if you really want to stay away from Twitter, you can just email us to oitewellness@nih.gov, and please submit your responses. You know, Friday at 5 is really tight given the ending of this workshop, so we're just going to pretend that the deadline is Thursday at 5. That gives you a whole day to do something. I think it's really important that we all support each other in taking care of ourselves right now, and so I really want to encourage you to go ahead and join us in this. And I want to start the workshop, and I want to start with this important thing to appreciate, that the honest truth is this is a remarkably unusual time in modern life. These are hard times for all of us, and I'm not sure any of us imagined that across the globe, people would be sent home, told to stay home, encouraged to stay away from each other. And unfortunately, we started with the language of social distancing as opposed to physical distancing. But the honest truth is that these are isolating times. It's a lot harder to get together and feel support. So these are hard times for all of us. But these are harder times for some. And I think that it's important at the start of this video to acknowledge that students working on their PhDs or students considering starting a doctoral program or master's program, students who just finished and are starting postdocs who are thinking about what's my next step. All of you are particularly vulnerable during times like these. You worry about the impact of the slowdown on your progress. You have to juggle taking care of yourself and the people you love and care about with meeting the needs of your career and your research and your PI. And I think it's fair to say that these are especially hard times for my biomedical researchers. I've heard many express fears that there'll be hiring freezes that will go on for a long time, people wondering, will they admit a new graduate class, a new medical school class, a new class of social workers, nurses, etc. I mean, we are really in this time of worry for the future. And so I think it's fair to say that we all really need a good dose of resilience. And so I want to start by defining what resilience is. Resilience is the ability to adapt and grow through adversity, and it's the ability to navigate a difficult challenge with awareness, intention, and skill, and the ability to find a constructive way forward during challenging times. You know, separate from this pandemic, when we think about our careers in science, the question isn't will we hit setback and disappointment and adversity. The question is when and how often and what will it be. So all of us need the ability to adapt and grow through adversity. Right now, we especially need that. Resilience is a set of attitudes and behaviors, and resilience can be realized or learned and developed through education, through self-reflection, and through practice. And the honest truth is that right now we are all practicing and developing our resilience. There are some things that you need to keep in mind that you need to work on developing if you want to really develop your resilience skills. And the first is self-awareness. You know, we all are poked by certain things. We all have a signature frustration response. We all respond to stress in a sort of unique way. We know what's hard for us and what's easy for us. And the more self-aware we are about those things, the better able we are to deal with challenge and setback. So the first step of developing our resilience skills is increasing and developing our self-awareness. We also need attention and focus. If we want to change a behavior that's not working for us, we have to be able to attend to it and focus on it and work to make progress. Resilience also means letting go, because there are many things that we don't control. And those of you who were on the video webinar last week about stress management during the coronavirus response might remember the 3 boxes, you know, the things we can control, the things we can't control, and the things we really wish we could control. And so we have to let go of the things that we can't control. We also have to let go of the people that we can't control. We have to appreciate that the only person that we can really control is ourselves. And in this, where we're trying to navigate expectations that others have of us and expectations that we have of them, we sometimes have to let go and appreciate that we can't make them do what we want or feel what we're feeling. We also need to have realistic expectations, and I'm going to come back to that and address that a little bit later. I think the idea that one day we were going to get an email that says go home and work, and that we were going to go home and work and suddenly be efficient and working up to speed, business as usual, is just not how it's going to play out. Not for any of us, even those of us who really want it to play out that way. It's going to take some time for us to figure out what's realistic right now. We're also going to have to figure out what's realistic as we watch this situation unfold and learn of more people who lose their lives and more dire situations. And so we really have to develop our realism skills. And a big part of our resilience skills is our ability to be realistic. We also need to develop the ability to access our positive emotions while acknowledging and feeling the negative ones. We tend to reach a point during a setback, during a really stressful situation, where we are just laser focused on the negative things that are happening. And we don't have the ability to access and see the positive. And even in really, really difficult times, the more we're able to access positive emotions, the more resilient we're able to be. And so these are some general things that as I go through the talk, I want you to keep in mind. I'm going to talk a lot about journaling today and a lot about community, but I wanted to put those 2 powerful tools within the context of 4 very powerful tools that I think we want to keep in mind as we explore our own resilience and work to build it. And I'm not saying that you would necessarily be looking at all 4 of these immediately, but I do think that it's important to talk about all of them, because in my experience in working with students and scientists around resilience, I've seen all 4 make a big difference. And the first is journaling, and I'll have something to say about that next. Another is mindfulness, which is really the ability to sit with our emotions without judging them and without immediately acting on them. The ability to acknowledge when we're sad, frustrated, angry, disappointed, happy, feeling relaxed, and to be with those emotions. Sometimes when people talk about mindfulness, they think about meditation, and I do think that that's one incredible way to develop our mindfulness. But for some of us, we use other strategies. And I gave you a link to a really nice article about mindfulness and meditation and other strategies. A major tool for resilience is community. This is really the challenge that comes out of that language of social distancing, sort of implying that we need to hunker down and isolate. And in fact, we've gotten orders from governors saying, you can't walk outside unless you're walking with someone who lives in your household. Stay 6 feet apart, right? We are getting these messages to isolate, but we are hardwired to connect, and we are very communal people, and we need to find ways to be in community regardless. So that's the third really powerful tool for developing our resilience. And finally, support groups and therapy can be a remarkable tool to grow in this area. This may be one that's difficult to access right now. NIH trainees have access to our resilience discussion groups, and some universities and campuses may have similar discussions either through their student health or their postdoc or graduate student office. There are also some local community-based organizations that are hosting support groups right now. And some students may have already have a relationship with a therapist. Some of you may be thinking of that as an adjunct, and it may be difficult to do that in this moment, but it is a really powerful tool for the long term. And I think that there's an awful lot of stigma around this, and so I want to put it up there right up front and say it can be a part of a resilience toolkit and make a huge difference. We're going to use journaling, not today together, but I'm hoping that you're going to download the handbook that goes along with this talk, and that you're going to consider journaling. And this is from an article that was in the New York Times a while back, and it was just a really fabulous article. But I just want to point out exactly what's said here, that journaling is one of the most effective acts of self-care, and it is also happily one of the cheapest. So sometimes it's nice to get a really nice notebook with paper that you love and a pen that you love, and you might have to put that off for now. The honest truth is we all have a paper and pen, and we can all start journaling. And there's all kinds of research studies that show that journaling builds resilience in students. It builds resilience in healthcare providers. It builds resilience in a variety of ways. And there's a whole lot of journaling, and I'm not going to go ahead and talk in detail about the different types of journaling, but I encourage you to Google and do some learning if you're interested. Journaling as a tool for self-awareness and problem solving and wellness is a mix. You sit down and you write a mix of fact-based descriptions of what happened or what's happening, but also your thoughts and feelings that go along with it. This is totally private. You don't have to share it with anyone. And sometimes we're driven by our ego, and we don't want to share what's really going on for us when we're talking to a mentor or a colleague or a peer. But to a piece of paper that can talk back, it can be an incredible way to really start to dive in and process our feelings. Data shows that journaling profoundly improves our sense of ease and well-being, and I think that there are at least two important ways to look at that. And one is that if we journal long enough over time, we can see patterns, right? We read something and we notice a pattern in our behavior. And sometimes we notice a helpful pattern and we choose to do more of it. And sometimes we notice a less helpful pattern and we choose to make a change. As we journal, we can put out ideas of how we might have handled something differently, right? In hindsight, here's what I wish I might have tried. In hindsight, next time I think it will be interesting to explore this. And so I think it's a really helpful way to improve our sense of ease and well-being. And journaling can be words, and it can be in any language you want or mix of languages. It can be pictures, it can be scribbles, it can be all kinds of different ways of putting your thoughts and your feelings and what's going on for you on paper. Today, there'll be embedded in here 11 journaling prompts. Those are the 11 prompts in the workbook that you can download. I'm going to encourage you to actually go ahead and do that. Alternatively, if you decide I just want to talk it through with people at your universities or with colleagues across different universities, get together in a chat room, in a Zoom chat room, and talk through the prompts, or even better, commit with a group of people to do some of the journaling and then come together and talk about it. Just remember, if you do that, that the goal is to listen and support our colleagues in a judgment-free way, not to tell them what to do or insist that your way of doing it is the best. The idea is for everyone to share, and then we gain these new perspectives of ways that other people have described for us. So that's the goal behind having the journaling prompts. So I'm going to start with this key takeaway message. 3 things. Resilience is people plus process plus preparation. And I already talked about a little bit about how community is so important, and we're going to dive a lot into process today, but I gave you some tips already about process, support groups and journaling, practicing mindfulness. And then preparation, or the idea that it doesn't just happen in real time, we have to actually work to develop our resilience. That said, it also happens in real time, so we are practicing our resilience right now. So I'm going to go through a list of things to be resilient. And for those of you who've heard the talk before, some of these slides are similar, but they will veer into very big changes as we move through. So the first thing is we have to learn from previous experiences, both good and bad. And my first journaling exercise is really about that. It's for you to think about a time when you were resilient in the past, when you faced a difficult challenge. You could focus on work, you could focus on something in your personal life. I think doing a little bit of both, given the circumstance we're in, maybe makes good sense. You think about it, you write about what happened, what was helpful, what behaviors and attitudes were helpful for you, what wasn't helpful. Resilience is some things that we do, but it's also things that we avoid doing or minimize doing, okay? And so that's one part. Now, the flip side is to think about a time when you faced a significant challenge and you were not as resilient as you had hoped. And what did you do and not do? And in looking back at it and reflecting on it, what might you have done different? We need to see our patterns, because then we can enhance the good and work to sort of soften the bad. We are who we are, and we're not, we don't easily change. We really tend to resist change quite a bit. But we can soften the rough edges of behaviors, and sometimes with effort, we can make really remarkable change. The other thing that we need is the people part. We have to build strong, positive relationships with peers and mentors. As I said, we are hardwired to connect through evolution. We have always existed in communities, and we are hardwired to connect. And a lot of data shows that human connection bolsters our immune system, and we certainly want to be doing everything that we can to bolster our immune system at this time. And so my second journaling exercise is for you to think about people in your life that you have turned to in difficult times, and to write about it a little bit. And at first I thought this was sort of trite, we all can list these people, but I realized this weekend I was feeling really rather stressed on Saturday and a little bit out of sorts, and I wasn't connecting very well with myself, and I'm here with my wife. It's just the two of us right now. I don't know, the two of us seem to be missing each other as well. And I just paused for a minute and said, so, where do I turn when I just need to talk some things out? And some people's faces popped into my head, and I reached out. I set up some chances to talk to people, and it was amazing how much better I felt. The other thing that I want you to think about is at your school and in your programs right now, are there people you've met who you have a sense could be people for you to talk to, colleagues, peers, mentors, and how might you turn to them right now? Now might be a good time for us to expand our circle of resilient supporters. And so beyond thinking about people in the past, I think it would be really helpful to think about developing some new connections right now. And then one thing, this exercise, it sort of leads to a lot of warm, positive feelings, I think, as we remember people who have really done, amazing things and supported us in the past. And there's one proven way to build your resilience. One of the proven ways is to actually practice gratitude, meaning that you actually thank somebody for what they've done for you. And there are other ways that you can build your resilience in terms of accessing positive emotions, but a gratitude letter or gratitude email is one way to do it. And so you could have some fun, make someone's day, and build your resilience all three simultaneously. So use this exercise as the starting point for a gratitude letter or email, someone you haven't reached out to in a while. Let them know how you're doing, what they've done to help you in the past, and how much you appreciate it. And it's amazing how good you'll also feel. The third thing to be resilient is we have to be proactive and use resources to thrive. None of us can do it alone. I think there's a real truth that asking for help is always a part of the solution, but it's always also hard, or for many of us, it is especially hard. So I want you to think about your resources in your research group, in your program, at your institute, in your communities, in your families. Think about virtual resources as well, but don't limit yourself there. Okay, we really need people at this point, even if they are across a computer screen and it's not optimal, we still really need people. Think about resources for you, your science, your career, your professional development, and make a list of those resources, right? And what you think they might be helpful for. And eventually you can expand that list by talking with mentors and peers and in these discussion groups that we are encouraging you to have. So those are the first three. We're going to move through those. We moved through those quickly, but we're going to take quite a long time on the next one. And that is, we need to be thoughtful about how we approach and engage with our negative self-talk. All right, we all are talking to ourselves regularly. In fact, we're telling ourselves stories. And we can think about this way from the ABCs. A is activating event, something happens. We send an email to RPI that has where we show a little vulnerability. We express a worry about something. We ask for support about something. And then we don't get an answer. And we don't, and we don't, and we don't. And time passes and we get more and more stressed about it. And that activating event and that stress drives beliefs. And we start to tell ourselves a story about that. And those stories or those beliefs have consequences in the long term. Right? We might get so worried about it that we can't focus and then we miss a deadline, right? So activating events lead to beliefs or stories, and those beliefs lead to consequences. And so we really have to be thoughtful about the stories we tell ourselves. Now I'm going to start with a little bit of philosophy at the outset, and this is from the work of Marshall Rosenberg and colleagues, who define this way of communicating called nonviolent communication. And this is based on the work of real civil rights leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And Marshall Rosenberg and colleagues point out that we have two ways of communicating, two types of communication: communication out, or how we talk to others, and communication in, or how we talk to ourselves. And then they point out that we can actually use two styles, and they use these pictures, which I think is such a great shortcut to help us. So on the one side is a jackal, and that jackal is going after that bird. That jackal normally in the classroom might say, what words come to mind? And somebody would say aggression, and somebody else would say in trouble, and somebody else would say, fierce, right? So you can communicate like a jackal, right? Aggressive, to tear people down, right? To tear yourself down. And then look at the giraffes and take a deep breath because that's mostly what happens when people see the picture of those giraffes, right? It's sort of calming. Giraffes have one of the largest hearts, if not the largest in the mammalian kingdom. They pump blood against a huge gradient. They can see over the tree canopy. So they have this broad view of things, right? And so what we want to do is remember the giraffe picture, the calm, building up, supportive way of communicating, not the jackal, rah, tear down, I'll get you way of communicating, okay? So I'm gonna ask you all a question then. Do you talk to yourself like a jackal or a giraffe? When you're telling yourself a story about a setback or about an interaction with your PI or about something really frustrating that happened to you as you tried to telework today, do you talk to yourself like a jackal or like a giraffe? And what about when you talk to others, especially when we're under stress like right now? Do we tend to talk to people like a jackal or like a giraffe? And then, really important, is what happens for you when someone jackals on you or talks to you like a jackal. And I bring that up because students often, when I talk about this, raise their hand and say, you know, what about when the jackal is outside, right? The jackal is somebody talking at you. And the honest truth is that the strategies for dealing with jackal language are similar, whether it's you jackaling on yourself or others jackaling on you, although there are lots of differences, and we'll try to talk about them. I see a question about demanding PIs, imposter fears, focus, etc. By the end of the workshop, I'm going to get through a whole lot of advice about that. And so those kinds of questions I'll take towards the end. All right. So for now, jackal or giraffe. And I just want to keep that in mind as we think about those stories. So activating events happen, the A, we hit setback, frustration, we get an angry email from somebody, we get a letter rejecting our paper, something happens, A, activating event. That leads to beliefs, B, and those beliefs lead to consequences. Those beliefs or the stories that we tell ourselves are often more negative than the situation warrants, and they are often delivered in jackal language. And these stories can be about life, personal relationships, work, careers, relationships with our PI, our future goals, etc. I mean, it doesn't matter. We are telling ourselves stories about things all the time. And typically those stories are more negative and delivered than the situation warrants and delivered in jackal language. And before I go into talking about those stories a little bit more, I'm going to take a few questions. The first one is how to avoid going down the negative self-talk rabbit hole and avoid the urge to stop reaching out or being vulnerable. And I'm going to give a lot of tips about that. I do want to say one thing about that now, and that is that we sometimes have to be careful about who we reach out to, especially when we're feeling very vulnerable. And so now is a time to really go back to that journaling prompt about who supports me, so that we are in part reaching out to people who really have our back. I'm going to talk about recognizing and having realistic expectations later. And somebody asked that I repeat the difference between a jackal and a giraffe. So jackal language is tear down language, and I'll give you an example. So I've had some troubles here getting organized to telework. I'm not a big fan of telework, and I don't have a very nice office organized. And I made a pretty big mistake earlier in the day. And for whatever reason, I was a little stressed, probably about the tree coming down, which I'll show you and talk about later. And instead of just saying, ouch, Sharon, you know, this will mean starting over. Oh, well, it's really an intense time, no big deal. That would have been a giraffe way of saying it. I, with a pretty intense intensity, internal and external. Oh, damn, I can't believe you're so stupid. How could you do this? I don't know if that comes across remotely as well as it does in the classroom, but that's the difference between jackal language and giraffe language. There's a question, if someone jackals on me, I tend to jackal on them. Is that encouraged, or should I giraffe on them? And that's a really interesting thing, and it takes us a little bit out of the topic of the workshop, but perhaps at some point during this shutdown quarantine period, we'll do a workshop that addresses that a little bit. I think we sometimes have to tone up a little bit, but in general, we should ask ourselves what kind of person we want to be and wish to be. And often if someone jackals on you and you calmly respond, they are shocked and they calm down. And so I tend to say that there's nuance and a need to talk about that, but it's really often best if we can find and channel our inner giraffe. And here's a question about mentors and trust and growth and things. And I'm going to leave that one for later when we talk about expectations and mentors, and hope, Ashley, that you ask it again. Any other questions about the introductory material, something that you don't understand or need clarification on before we go on? All right, so then I want to dive into the stories, and I want to talk about two things: cognitive distortions, which lead us to feel rather pessimistic and helpless and hopeless, and imposter fears, which are actually a special flavor of cognitive distortions, and they lead us to feel like we don't belong. And I'll have some things to say about why I called it imposter fears and not imposter syndrome. But first, let's talk about cognitive distortions. And they're also called automatic negative thoughts. So if you want to Google these, Google both of them, you'll find some really cool material out there. These are characteristic ways that our mind convinces us of something that is really not true to reinforce negative thinking and emotions, okay? Cognitive distortions generally serve to keep us feeling bad about ourselves. And if they really grow and run amok in our head, and we are jackaling on ourselves through all these cognitive distortions, they can lead us to feel very anxious and very pessimistic. And I think one of the key things to understand is that our brain has a built-in negativity bias. Our brain evolved to keep us safe. And so our brain is constantly scanning for danger, and it would be much smarter if we see a lion in the distance. It would be much smarter for our brain to say, danger, go, than to say, pause and check this out. Oh, I wonder if it's soft. I wonder if those teeth are sharp. Like, our brain would not be serving us well. So our brain has a built-in negativity bias. We tend to tell our stories more negative than they are because we sense all of those activating events as stress, and stress induces a feeling of danger, and our brain is trying to protect us. Now, I'm going to, hey, Lori, is it possible to unmute everyone all at one time? All right, I think not. So we won't do the vote, but we're going to talk through some cognitive distortions. Now, I'm going to do this a little bit different than I normally do it. Usually I give examples right out of the research space. Today I'm going to give some related to the research space and some related to the quarantine, the pandemic, and everything we're dealing with. So here's the first example: all or nothing thinking. Our performance is either perfect or it is a complete failure. Something is either all good or all bad. So you go to a meeting and you present a poster and you do really well, but there are a couple questions you can't answer. And people say, hey, how was your poster presentation? And you say, it was terrible. It didn't go well at all. That's an example of all or nothing thinking. But let's say at the end of a day in quarantine, you get up and you realize that you never finished one project you wanted to finish. You did finish 3 others, or made great progress on 3 others, but one you got caught on, distracted, stressed, overwhelmed, you let it go. And you get up at the end of the day and you say, boy, that was a lousy day. That's all or nothing thinking. It was a mix of good and not so good. but all or nothing thinking doesn't let you see that. Another cognitive distortion is catastrophizing. We exaggerate the implications of a setback, or we see a situation as much worse or severe than it is. And so sometimes we take an exam or we submit a grant and we don't get a great score. And our mind races ahead to the future in a catastrophizing way, and we decide we're never going to have the career we want. That's catastrophizing. Or we see a situation as much worse or severe than it is. And so this pandemic is very severe. And we look at the pandemic and the slowdown, and we say, I'm going to be out of the lab for 6 weeks. And we see that as we're not going to get anything done for 6 weeks, so I won't finish anything, so I won't get a job, right? We're in the midst of something really stressful, and we catastrophize the future of its impact on our career. Not to say there won't be some impact, there might be, and there will be likely impacts on all of us, right? But we, instead of trying to say, let me slow down and put this in perspective, we just go to the worst case scenario. So that's catastrophizing. The next is mental filter. We only focus on negative events and ignore anything positive. And right now, that's really, really easy trap to fall into, right? And so we could do experiments for a week, and we could have a lot of them work, but some of them don't. And we focus really exclusively on the negative events. We ignore the positive, a lot like all or nothing thinking, all right? And that happens again day to day right now, right? Where we focus on all the negative news and ignore any of the positive news. Mind reading goes together with this one, fortune telling. So mind reading is when we make assumptions about what someone else is thinking. So you're in lab and your PI walks by, and she walks by really sort of huffy and quick, right? And she walks in her office and she closes the door, and you say, wow, she must not have liked my abstract. That's mind reading, right? I gave her an abstract yesterday. She walked by me without chatting, so she must not like my abstract. Or right now, a lot of mind reading is happening because we are totally dispersed and not together. You send an email to your PI, right? You don't get an answer. Oh, he didn't like it. Oh, she must be angry at me. Oh, I said it wrong. Mind reading, all right? Fortune telling goes along with it. It's when we predict the outcome of an event before it actually happens, right? I won't do well on that interview, right? Or this paper won't get accepted. So it's when we already, and again, it goes along with catastrophizing in many ways. We often fortune tell towards catastrophizing. So for me, I know those two go together for myself, and they might for you as well. Emotional reasoning is when we assume our emotions are a true reflection of the way things are. So this morning I felt stupid, or actually maybe more accurately, I should say a small part of me felt stupid because I did make a pretty big mistake. That doesn't make me stupid. That just means that I was distracted and did something and made an error. But we assume our emotions are an accurate reflection of the way things are. And one of the things that, is a good thing to keep in mind is it's so much better to say a part of me feels stupid than it is to say I'm so stupid. It just gives us space to acknowledge, that yes, our behavior might have been stupid or selfish or whatever, but that doesn't label us, and it's not us. And everybody always wants tips and tricks, right? And I see them already. Do you have any advice on how to deal with these? And really the advice we'll talk a lot about advice, it is to first acknowledge them, right? So own them. I said and a vote. So you need to embrace your cognitive distortions. But the second thing is to work to soften them, right? To work to make them have less of an impact. And I'll talk a lot about ways to do that. Another
Hey, Sharon, I have a poll. Yeah. Do you want to do a poll?
No, it's okay. I think that I want to
Okay.
stay on schedule. I was going to try to have everybody make noise. It's no big deal. I think I'm assuming based on the questions that people are voting as we move along. All right. Another one is control fallacies. We believe we have no control over a situation, or we believe we are complete control of our surroundings and experiences. Either one of these lead us down a pretty difficult road. If we believe we have no control, right, our PI has all the power, they determine what happens now, they will write a letter that will influence everything, like we give up all of our control, then we really feel like we lack any agency in the situation, and the feeling like we don't have any control really can lead us to feel hopeless and helpless. And the truth is, power and hierarchy exists, and your PI does have, I mean, we should be realistic, they do have some power and control, but so do you. And so we don't want to fall into the control fallacy of having no control. However, on the flip side, we believe we are in complete control of our surroundings and experiences. That leads down a difficult road as well. You know, right now, the distractions are enormous. For those of you teleworking with children, family members, responsibility for aging parents, you know, things are going to happen that take you out of your routine. So you think, I'm going to telework today and get a lot done, but you're not in complete control of your surroundings or experiences. And when we believe we are, that we can control everything, then when things don't go the way we expected, we own all of that, and it really can get in the way. And so these are some really important ones to keep in mind. I want to end with one more: overgeneralization. We take one negative event and see other events through that same failure. So we have a difficult interaction with our PI or with a colleague, a collaborator, and then we have to have another conversation with a different colleague or collaborator or a committee member or someone else in our professional space, and we take that negative event and we just carry the umbrella of negativity, and we assume all the other events will work the same way. And so these are important cognitive distortions to keep in mind. So unfortunately, we didn't get to vote, but what I would like you to do is look at these and just for yourself jot down or mentally take a note of which ones you use a lot. Most of us have 3 or 4 cognitive distortions that we typically go to again and again. I can tell you that I catastrophize and I fortune tell, and I have some issues of control fallacies in believing that I'm in complete control. And, you know, even like doing these webinars pokes on my control fallacies because I think I can anticipate everything that will go wrong and fix it in advance, and we can't. So you think about your cognitive distortions and hold on to them. And now I want to talk about one other kind of cognitive distortion, which I'm going to call imposter fears, not imposter syndrome, okay? The reason for that is that I think the word syndrome implies there's something wrong with us. We have a syndrome. I think it's just the opposite. Imposter fears make so much sense in high knowledge environments when you're a student and learning things, that I think that we need to sort of embrace them and own them and acknowledge them and talk about them, not from this perspective of there's something wrong, but from this perspective of course I feel like this right now. Imposter fears are the feeling of phoniness in people who believe that they are not intelligent, capable, or creative, despite evidence of high achievement. So let me just first say that imposter fears are formed by the cognitive distortion known as minimizing, okay? We tend to discount our successes. We tend to attribute our success to luck. We tend to minimize our accomplishments. Imposter fears are very, very common in individuals who work in artistic and high knowledge environments. And if you think about it, science is both an artistic endeavor and a very high knowledge endeavor. I mean, your guy's PhD looks nothing like mine back in the early 90s, right? I did one technique again and again and again, and now to publish a paper or complete a PhD, you have done multiple techniques, collaborated across the globe, used computational approaches and models, cell culture and animal models, etc. I mean, just the high knowledge environment that you work in now, it's really staggering to those of us who started a long time ago. And so I think it makes sense that we have imposter fears. I want to say a couple of other things about both cognitive distortions and imposter fears. So first of all, these are typically a major part of the stories we tell ourselves. And in terms of imposter fears and in normalizing those, let me say the data from Dr. Plant, who was the person who first started researching imposter fears, is that 70+% of all individuals experience imposter fears as part of their educational and career journey. Okay, so how can something be wrong with us for feeling imposter fears, right? Not to say we don't want to be thoughtful about them, we don't want to work to soften them, we don't want to work to make sure they stay out of our way. Of course we want to do that, but I don't think we should own them like there's something wrong with us. We should own them like we're well aware that we're in an intense high knowledge environment and that what we do and say and what we learn matters. And so I just really want to normalize them. So these are typically a major part of the stories we tell ourselves, but we all have our own go-to cognitive distortions, and those are a product of nature and nurture. So our biology and brain chemistry contributes. Our early childhood messages contribute to which cognitive distortions we tend to go to, and those are modified through experience. And so as I have learned this material and taught this material, I spent a lot of time thinking about my own tendency to catastrophize, and I feel like by now I should have figured that out. But I realized that I probably spent every day of my early childhood in a catastrophizing environment. It was sort of the signature of everyone around me. And so it's hard when you get early childhood messages to let go of them very easily. It's like we've sat, in an environment for a long time and we've internalized a lot of messages. So it's nature and nurture, and they can be hard to let go of, but we can soften them, appreciate them, and learn to work with them. The other thing about cognitive distortions, and in particular about imposter fears, is that for those individuals underrepresented in the biomedical research space, people of color, individuals with disabilities, that can really drive minimizing, and that leads to imposter fears. When we look around and we don't see a lot of people who look like us, then we really can fall prey to those imposter fears. I also think identity and first generation status, whether that be first generation college student or first generation scientist, first generation graduate student, I think that too leads to imposter fears through minimizing. So we all have our go-to signatures that we've learned from childhood and through experience, and then they're modified by the cultures that we're in. Now, at times and in small doses, these distortions may motivate us to work hard and to use resources to thrive. When I catastrophize about a grant, oh, I'm not going to get that grant, I might read it a couple more times. I might have it edited. I might talk to somebody about an experiment I'm missing. If I can keep that catastrophizing in check, I use it to prepare and be more careful. But if they are really unchecked and unquestioned, imposter fears and cognitive distortions hold us back. They add to our struggle, and they lead to all kinds of self-sabotaging behavior. So I'll go back to that. And some of you have written either your proposal for grad school or F fellowship grant or a K grant or a proposal for an internal grant of some sort. So that grant example probably resonates for some of you. And if not, you can imagine it as a paper. So let's say I catastrophize a little bit about this, and maybe I fortune tell a little bit that I'm not going to get it. And maybe there's some all or nothing thinking because some of the preliminary results didn't work out. You name it. All these all these cognitive distortions are happening for me. If I put them into perspective and take a deep breath and I mindfully soften them and say, this isn't helping, let me get back to my grant, those feelings might make me double check and work harder, right? And get some help on the grant. But if I let them grow and grow and grow, I don't know about you, but what I'm going to do is go home and going to turn some TV on and say, oh, this is just a 30-minute break. And that 30 minutes is going to turn into 300 minutes. And I'm numbing out, not taking a break. Or I start to get so worried about it that I decide I can't ask for help. I'm embarrassed. It's not very good. I feel shame about the experiments that didn't work. Unchecked and unquestioned, these cognitive distortions and imposter fears hold us back. And so we really need to spend some time exploring our self-talk. And the first way to do that is through journaling. That journaling around cognitive distortions can be really helpful. And so that's journal prompt number 5. A little bit about your go-to cognitive distortions, how you recognize them, what they do to affect your behavior. And then, because sometimes it's so hard for us to see cognitive distortions in ourselves, I just asked you a question about your friends. For 2 reasons. First of all, because sometimes once we see them in others, we can start to see them in ourselves. The second reason is if you start to think about how you would talk to your friend about them, I bet you would use giraffe language, and I bet you would be highly supportive. And as you write about how you'll support a friend in dealing with them, maybe you can borrow that giraffe language and that kind approach for yourself. It's interesting that we will jackal on ourselves while we giraffe to a friend. And so I want you to journal a little bit about what cognitive distortions you see in your friends. And then I want you to just think a little bit about moving forward, what you might like to work on and change. So this, I think, is one of the really important journaling exercises. All of them are important, but I'm going to stress this one a little bit. Beyond that, you need to talk about your cognitive distortions and imposter fears. I actually think they thrive because we're embarrassed and ashamed of them, so we don't talk about them. Once we bring them to light and we start to realize this bites everyone in the butt, we all feel this way at times, then I think they become so much more manageable. And then finally, I talked at the beginning that talking with counselors and using support groups is a great way to go. In particular, if you feel that cognitive distortions are driving your anxiety and leading you to feel really hopeless and depressed, it's really important to reach out to a therapist so that you can explore why and learn skills for dealing with them. In fact, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a well-known and used therapeutic intervention, is based on identifying cognitive distortions and working with them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about dealing with them, and then we're going to pause in the moment. Okay, I mean, well, that's the slide. We're going to pause and I'll take questions. So sometimes you just catch yourself in the moment, catastrophizing or all or nothing thinking or fortune telling. When you catch yourself in the moment, when you hear them, take a deep mindful breath, and I mean a really deep breath, and pause for a moment. For me, I need after that pause to stretch. So if you could see the camera, you'd see that my hands are up over my head already stretching. And I just got out of my chair to actually stretch even more. Something about the stretch for me adds to the mindfulness. For you, it may just be a deep mindful breath and a pause. Do something to stop yourself in the moment. And then you want to acknowledge them and talk back to them. And you want to use giraffe language. I want you to use another kind of language as well, and that is your inner scientist. So we're all scientists, so we know how to ask questions. Like, what is the evidence that I won't be able to finish my fellowship because of this? Or what is the evidence that my paper is really terrible because this this journal didn't accept it? In fact, actually, I see some evidence that the reviewers liked parts of it. What is the evidence? How likely is it that, right? That's another really good one. How likely is it that I won't get into any school because I didn't get into this first school? Is there another hypothesis? And I like to use that one when I'm mind reading a lot. So I will assume that somebody is upset or angry because they haven't reached out, and I'll be like, is there another hypothesis? Yes, they're in another meeting. Yes, they had to take care of something else. Yes, they liked it, but wanted to edit it a little bit. All right, so you want to talk back using giraffe language and using your inner scientist. And then I think it's important to know how you find inspiration. Some of us have a positive affirmation, a phrase that we like. Some of us have an image that make us strong. We just close our eyes for a moment, and we just channel that positive, calm, safe place. And that can be inspiring. And that can really just bring us down from that jackal edge, right? And we start moving away from the jackal language, and we finally reach some giraffe language, and we can remind ourselves, oh, we're just catastrophizing. And now, one of my most favorite phrases is, that's just me catastrophizing. All right. The other thing about dealing with cognitive distortions and imposter fears, you need to appreciate that these stories that we tell ourselves of how terrible things are, they are a part of the human experience, the student experience, the lifelong learner experience. This is just a part of being out there doing something that we really care about and are passionate about. And so we really need to be kind to ourselves, right? Remember, we tend to giraffe to others, and we need to start learning to giraffe to ourselves. So I want to give you just an acronym to help. HATS. Hear your negative self-talk. Appreciate you have a choice. Talk back, giraffe language. And seek help and access resources. And I like this acronym because it's simple, but also you could almost imagine yourself, pulling off or putting on a hat, right? Just I'm putting on a hat to help myself right here. So it's just an acronym to help us deal with those voices. And a hack that I learned recently, I can't remember from who, but I think it's really terrific. Are these thoughts helping me or hurting me? Sometimes when I really get on the jackal language train, it's this question that stops me. So are these thoughts helping me or hurting me? And I've noticed sometimes when I ask it of someone else, they too can stop jackaling on themselves pretty quickly. So it seems to be very helpful. I have to say it also helps for actions too. So when I open the, lately, being in the house so much, it's really hard not to eat snacks. And I know that healthy eating is important. And the other day, I just opened up a bag of chocolate chip cookies, and I just didn't seem to be able to stop. And I find, is this helping me or hurting me? And I realized, oh, this is hurting me. And it was easy to put them away after that. So that's another hack that really works. All right. So what I want to do is pause here and take questions on imposter fears. And I'm going to come back to questions about mentors jackaling when we do the mentor part of this at the end, okay? There's a question about how do you let go of inequality in the lab, especially if it goes on for a long time. One part of resilience is appreciating what you can change and what you can't change, and trying to change yourself and your response to a situation. And without knowing details, it's hard for me to answer that, but I would say in general, sometimes we do have to face the fact that there's something we have to let go of. We have to ask, how is it impacting us? And if we decide that it pokes on our feelings about justice, but and that's getting in the way. Sometimes we have to just let go. But maybe, Allie, later you'll come back with help clarify the question, and maybe I can answer better. You will be able to access it so you can listen to it again, and I hope the workbook will extend your learning as well. So someone shared, Nestor, that mind reading, overgeneralization, and catastrophizing are the cognitive distortions that they own. And Roseanne points out that syndrome as a term for this seems like catastrophizing. Fear is a much better term. Actually, I'm gonna borrow that. I like that way of thinking about it. Somebody has also, somebody asked what I think about imposter phenomenon, which is used by wellness staff at their school. I think that I most like the term imposter fears, but I respect everybody's use of other terms. And I think phenomenon suggests that it's a couple of different, it manifests itself in a couple of different ways that come together. And if that language works for you, I think it's terrific. There's a question here, should we seek counseling? Actually, I'm going to answer this and say, if you had asked me that a decade ago, I would have said, no, why, something wrong, no, not necessary. And I've really come to learn that counseling is one of the most wonderful ways available to us to gain self-awareness, to look at our behaviors, to understand where they come from, and to try to soften them and do something about it. And I think that it is a huge shame that in this country, counseling has been stigmatized. In science, it's been stigmatized. In many communities, it's been stigmatized. And I think it's a huge shame as well that insurance sometimes makes it very, very difficult. So somebody once said to me, one of the OITE wellness advisors, who I really respect gratefully, that she felt that counseling was a human right. And I think that that's a really, really nice way of looking at it. And so, yes, I think that if you have the resources for professional counseling and you are struggling, that it's critically important to reach out. If you have the resources and you feel that you are doing well but could do even better, counseling is another appropriate strategy. Somebody points out, Sean, on occasion I have imposter fears and worried about getting feedback from advisors and mentors. I worry that it may not be good enough. The PI will question abilities, and how do I overcome this imposter fear? And I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about the fact that that imposter fears do keep us from reaching out and from being assertive for ourselves and getting what we need. I'm going to briefly talk about something called having a growth mindset. It's some of my most favorite material, and I'm sorry we're going to do it pretty quickly. Actually, it's coming next. A growth mindset means that we embrace the idea that, of course, we need to learn and grow. In my office, Pat Sokoloff still edits my writing, okay? She's a much better writer than I am, and she edits many of the things that I write. So we're all a work in progress. I think sometimes because PIs talk like jackals, either because they're tired and distracted and don't even realize it, or because sometimes they can be quite unkind, and sometimes I can be quite unkind. Sometimes we all can be quite unkind. I think that jackal language sends us a message to never ask again. And somehow we have to separate the way a message is delivered from the message itself. We also have to keep working as a community to support each other in learning how to give better feedback. We also need to appreciate that sometimes we feel that someone is jackaling on us when really it's their communication style. So I think my son always says to me, why are we arguing? And I'm like, we're not arguing. I'm just giving you an important message I feel strongly about. And he rolls his eyes. And then I realize, to me, I feel like I'm talking like the way I always talk, but I have a little bit more energy behind it, and I say it a few times too many, and it sounds like a jackal. So I think you want to remind yourself that the cognitive distortion of imposter fears is getting in your way of learning from your PI, and channel your growth mindset and try to reach out. And I'll talk about growth mindsets in a minute. The self-isolation felt by those who are underrepresented can feel further exaggerated during this time of extreme isolation. How can we become more resilient? Thank you, Teresa. And I think that the reason I almost took imposter fears out because I wanted to talk so much about the pandemic. And then I realized that I think imposter fears right now make it even harder to email, join a Skype meeting. There are barriers to overcome. So I think you're right. I think that the self-isolation is likely to drive imposter fears for many. And I hope that some of the wellness things will address a little bit towards the end, that appreciating that this is such a human response to this extremely difficult situation, that maybe all of that will allow you to soften for a moment and to reach out. Because, and I also hope that we start reaching out to each other. Maybe we can all check on each other right now and be there for each other. I hope the guide means that there's an easy way for you to reach out to some people who did this and say, let's get together. Because I agree that the self-isolation is making it really difficult. So here Nicole says, what if you're really good at giving evidence when you're in a catastrophe mode? I know this paper is going to be rejected, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sometimes we can I don't mean to blah, blah that your question was bad. I mean that it's sort of all the things, right? I know why it will get rejected. Here's what I think about it. That's what I meant by that. I think that I call that the cognitive distortion train. And the minute it starts, it gains a huge amount of energy. And somehow we have to pause. And the best way to pause is take a deep breath and stop for a moment. And meditation is very hard for me, and I try, and I haven't really mastered it yet. I keep working at it, but I haven't mastered it yet. And what I have learned from practicing meditation is the ability to take a deep breath and pause. And I think when our jackal cognitive distortion train is running down the track all speed ahead, it is amazing what a deep breath will do. Sometimes it takes a little bit more than a deep breath. In the workshops that I'm going to plug in a few minutes that were taped last week, there was a lot of discussions about deep breathing and how that can help. And I encourage you to try that to stop the train. Here's a question about writing, not having a lot of expertise in writing and where to start. And I think I'm going to encourage you to look for resources at your school or institution through the Writing Center or your program to know where to get started. How do you conclude if it's imposter fears or it's a legitimate concern and that your gut instinct is correct? So I'm going to assume that's around something like you think, this is really not good enough. I'm not good enough at this. And I'm going to say that probably we should assume, since we've made it this far, that we have the ability to keep moving on. And we should always err on the side of the assumption that we can do this. And we should accept that we may need more help than some people, right? We are good at some things, great at other things, and not so good at some things. That's true of everyone. So what you're not great at, somebody else might be great at. Comparing ourselves one by one doesn't help very, very often. And so you should always err on the side that imposter fears are driving a little bit of normal, healthy worry about learning something hard. Now, we can't dismiss everything as, it'll be okay. I just have to convince myself, right? That positive thinking without realism doesn't go very far. So if you notice, I didn't say hat and just stop. I said hats, seek resources to thrive, right? We can't just say, oh, we'll be fine in everything, because we are going to have to work hard. And so it's a balance between those two things. How does one rid themselves of imposter fears in the lab, and comparing oneself to lab mates who are making more progress than you in their project relatively? I like to say to myself, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Although I love sprinting and don't like marathons very, very much. The honest truth is, for all of you, your career goals are a marathon, not a sprint. You also need to appreciate that while comparing ourselves to others is totally human, it is not very helpful. And we should appreciate that we only are taking a snapshot in time. We compare ourselves in that moment. And then that moment grows and grows. And then it's important to appreciate that at another time, your experiments might be working and theirs might not be. Or you might be writing really easily and they're struggling to write. I think it's really important to try to remind ourselves that it's not a competition and it's not a sprint. I don't know what the access code is, but if someone types it in, that will be helpful to you. How do you train your subconscious mind to avoid negative self-talk? So let me just say I'm a scientist by training. I have a PhD in cell biology. I'm not an expert in any of this. I just think about science a lot and I've learned this material. I think the idea is not to train us to avoid it. It is a part, we are hardwired to do this. Our ancient brain is constantly scanning the environment looking for stress, and it's sending us messages. So I think the goal is to train ourselves to be soft with the negative self-talk, not to avoid it completely, but to be soft with it. I find a lot of my mental distortions are linked to comparing myself with others. Do you have advice about this issue in our very competitive environment? I would agree. I think that's true for everyone or many people, Catherine. I guess my advice is two things. First of all, we are training ourselves to compare ourselves to others constantly by all of the time we spend scrolling through perfected pictures in Facebook and Instagram. And I think that we need to appreciate that as human beings, we like to project the most together image as possible. And we should appreciate we're comparing our insides to somebody else's outside. And we should remind ourselves of that all the time. The second thing, I think I'm going to address that issue of competitive environment. And, you know, I said we have to have mantras and phrases to help. And one of mine is, it is what it is. And this is a very competitive environment, and people count papers and they pay, did you get one in the big three? And my H factor is this. You know, and I got a platform talk, not a poster. We do tend to really accumulate accomplishments and focus on them a lot. And I think that we have to acknowledge that that's the environment that we're in, and a little bit develop the ability to let go, to enjoy somebody else's success and our successes, but to appreciate we are not those accomplishments. We are people. Those accomplishments are just something that happens to us at work that we value and that are important. But that at the end of our life and at the end of big experiences that we have, that we are much more than the sum total of our CV. I don't think that what's on my CV are the most important things that I've accomplished. That's not to say they're not important for getting what we want. And so again, the idea is balance and letting go, right, of this need for perfection. What should I do when it feels like all I do now are cognitive distortions? Where can I start to do better? I would say a first start is the wellness workshop that I'll show you a link to in a little while. I think it was a wonderful way for us all to begin. Journaling would be a wonderful way. Talking about this workshop to someone else would be a wonderful way. You can email the slides to whomever you would like. You know, we just need small baby steps to get started. How do you let go of biases you've developed against yourself and other people, which you've developed over time through bad experience, and it gets in the way of making new trusted connections? Thank you. You know, I worry about students who are in a lab with a jackal PI and they were jackaled on for a really long time, and then they can't trust the next PI or the next collaborator or the next rotation advisor. And I always tell the students that I work with who have had a bad experience that they should imagine that they're carrying around a bag of very, very heavy rocks, super heavy rocks, and that they need to talk with someone about them to let it go. And by someone, I mean a counselor or a therapist. You need to go into a room privately, all about yourself, where you don't have to worry about what people think about you as a scientist, and where they're just there for you, and you have to really talk it through. I think that letting go of those rocks so that you can trust in the next time is one of the most important gifts that you can give yourself. Here's a question about medication. A therapist who recommended medication, and it feels like admitting something is wrong. You know, it's interesting. And again, I'm no expert, and I'll go back a little bit to myself to answer this and say that I'm in that age where women have to worry about osteoporosis, and the nurse practitioner that I work with talked to me a lot about medication. And I said, why? I exercise, I run, I move, I'm young, why? And then I realized that this was like some image of myself, and something about the medication changed my image in some way. And I sat with that for a little bit, and suddenly it softened. So I would encourage you to think about what you might tell a friend. I would encourage you to talk with the therapist about other things that you could also try, but I would encourage you to be very, very open to the suggestions that people make. Somebody said, I'll add that when I saw the giraffe, they looked curious to me, and I think curiosity is a super helpful and mindful, non-judgmental approach. Thank you, Lake. I'm going to keep that in mind because I would agree with that, and that's another nice thing. Imposter fears have literally prevented me from doing my qualifying exam. It's been sitting, I submitted it. Do you have any tips? I think you're all going to get frustrated with me for saying this again, but when imposter fears or any of these cognitive distortions are so large that they're holding you back from something that important, finding a supportive therapist and talking it out makes a big difference. You could start with a mentor that you trust at school, but the honest truth is that we are good in science, but not always so good on the emotional side of doing science. And you really want to work this out before the imposter fears trigger issues that trigger bigger issues. And so I encourage you to do that soon. How can imposter fears be controlled if you feel you are being, I'm not sure I understand that, Nicole. So I'm going to ask you to try to reframe and ask that question again. I'm going to take a couple more questions and then we'll move on so we get through the rest of the material. How do we get over the fear that by giving up our negative self-talk, we will lose our motivation? I don't think you'll ever be able to give up your negative self-talk. You just want to soften it, and you'll find it to be incredibly motivating. If it's really soft and gentle and partially folded into a growth mindset, which is what I want to talk about next. I think that it's so much more that these get in the way than they're helping us. I think it's almost a false sense that they're helping us. I think that we got through things despite them, not because of them. And so I would encourage you to think about it that way. I'm going to go ahead and move on, but I will stay on and answer more questions. All right. So we talked a lot about cognitive distortions and stories. I want to talk about one other thing that we need to do to be resilient, and that is develop our growth mindset. And I love this material. And it comes from Dr. Carol Dweck. She wrote a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, and there's some links there. Just think about this. Oh, I'm not a good public speaker. That's not very motivating. Where do you go with that? But if you just say, oh, I'm not a good public speaker yet, so the power of yet. If you just tack on that idea of yet, that sends you a message. I can grow and I can learn and I can accomplish this. And so she writes a lot about the power of yet. And she calls that the ability to see that we're all growing and learning a growth mindset. And she goes through some other things about the hallmarks of a growth mindset. The most important one is that we believe that we can grow and learn, whether something comes easily to us or not. So right now we're asking so many new things of you, right? And it's going to take time. And people with a growth mindset say, well, this is day 3 and it's going to be better on day 4 and even better on day 5. People with a growth mindset explore new approaches and new ways of tackling problems when we get stuck. So looking at some of the things that you all brought up, how to talk to your PI, how to overcome imposter fears. Maybe it's time to get curious, channel the giraffe, get curious. What would be a new way for me to move forward and tackle these? It's one of the hallmarks of a growth mindset. Another one is that we ask for help and use resources to promote learning when we need it. Another is we acknowledge and embrace that we have weaknesses, like we all do. And I know we compare ourselves to others and we think those individuals don't have weaknesses, but we all do. And some weaknesses are big barriers to our success, and if we're not willing to embrace them and work on them, they will bite us in the butt and get in the way. So I guess going back to the imposter fears question, if we look at this from a growth mindset and say, wow, these are really holding me back, lots of self-sabotaging behavior. I won't reach out for help. I won't take my qualifying exam. I won't apply for this thing that I might get. These are really holding me back. We embrace them. Then it's so much easier to work on them and to soften them. Hallmark of a growth mindset is we focus on process and not only outcome. I want to talk about that vis-a-vis like telework and getting work done right now. So none of us are at our best. We are living through an unprecedented time and we are distracted. So sometimes we're only focused on the outcome of the day, not the progress that we made along the way in getting set up better or learning how to deal with things better. The process matters too, not just the outcome. People with a growth mindset make a mistake, and instead of being shamed and jackling on themselves, they learn from it. And finally, people with a growth mindset learn about giving and receiving feedback. And I'm committed to doing a workshop on receiving feedback, especially on receiving feedback from people whose communication styles are a little firmer and harsher than ours, people who sometimes can jackal on us. We're generally a mix of fixed and growth mindset, and we move back and forth between the two depending on how we feel. So we can't be too hard on ourselves for finding us in a fixed mindset, but we want to be able to pause and say, ooh, that's a fixed mindset. What can I do about it? And our goal is to develop and maintain as often as possible a growth mindset in areas that really matter. You can watch Carol Dweck's video online, and I would really encourage that before you do this journal prompt on growth mindsets. And so I want to actually go back now a little bit to some of the questions that were asked about how to telework, how to deal with PIs, how to set expectations and things. Because if you think about it, we've been talking about HATS, and HATS is seek help and access resources. And so we're going to spend some time in that area for a little bit before I take some questions. Okay, and so I think that we need now some information and learning about how to deal with these unprecedented times. And there are a lot of out spots that we're all dealing with right now. The first is just the impact of the pandemic on our stress level and our ability to focus and make calm decisions. None of us make our best decisions when we're stressed, and we are all in the midst of a stress storm, right? All you have to do is open up your phone and check the news to be stressed. Another out spot right now is the expectations we have of ourselves and the expectations others have of us, especially in light of our tendency to catastrophize and fortune tell about the impacts this will have long term on our science and careers. We have to find ways to be productive, and many of us are new to telework, so that's a big out spot for lots of us. We're dealing with fallout from changes in educational and training programs, qualifying exams that have been moved, dissertations that exam committee meetings that can't happen, K-99 deadlines that we're stressed about. So we have lots of fallout from changes in educational and training programs. And then last, many of you have brought up PIs already, the stresses that remote communication puts on mentor-mentee and other relationships. And I'm just going to talk briefly about some of these. And the first I want to talk about is the impact of the pandemic on our stress level. And I want to start by this first principle. To do well, we have to be well. Holistic self-care is what we do and don't do to take care of our body, our heart, our mind, and our spirit. And I want you to stare at that picture. And I want you to realize that you are not hands with keyboards, right? You are not heads on sticks. You are whole people. And if we don't take care of our body and our heart and our mind and our spirit, we cannot be a successful graduate student, postdoc, scientist, parent, child, niece, nephew, uncle, aunt, human being. We have to take care of ourselves. And I know that science has delivered terrible, unhealthy messages about this. There are 2 great workshops on dealing specifically with the pandemic stress that were recorded from NIH OITE last week. Both links are here. There are many more views left. Once there are 3,000 views, you won't be able to watch it, but we will offer it again if we need to. And I think the first thing we all need to do is stare at this and say, I got to start taking care of myself, even if the message from my PI is just get back to work. There is no just get back to work right now. All right, there never was, for one thing. Science has deluded itself for a long time about this. Yeah, we have to work hard, and that means sometimes more than 40 hours, and that means weekends at the bench or weekends writing, but it can't be all the time. We still have to find time to take care of ourselves. And so I really encourage you to watch those. There's a lot of ouches around expectations. So I want to ask you a couple of questions around expectations, and I want to give you permission, and I hope you take it to really sit with this slide. Setting expectations is context specific, and I think we really need to ask ourselves, how much work can I realistically accomplish under these circumstances? Life is really constrained right now, and in many ways much harder. We can't get around very easily. Getting food is challenging. Some of you are in small apartments with multiple people, all trying to get work done. Childcare and other family responsibilities may have to take precedence all or some of the time. Worry and anxiety makes it hard to concentrate. Like we need, I said at the beginning, one thing about resilience is being realistic. And I think we need to be realistic about what we realistically can and cannot accomplish right now. We have to be way, way more giraffe with ourselves and with others. The other thing about expectations is we need to ask ourselves who else has expectations of us, and what are our thoughts and our feelings around those expectations, and how are those thoughts and feelings impacting us. I think that for those of you stressing about relationships with your PIs, if your relationship was difficult and strained before this, it's likely to be difficult and strained during this time, and it may be hard to make dramatic change right now. I think it also, you need to ask yourself in terms of your PI, what her or his view of work is at this time, right? I've had lots of PIs reach out to me asking what wellness resources can I send to my trainees? And I've had PIs say, why are they not getting more work done, right? Everyone has their own view of this, and a little bit you have to look at what is and try to manage it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about being assertive with your PI, because I'm not saying they get to decide everything for you. Actually, I'm saying the opposite. You have to decide for yourself, knowing that they may or may not agree fully with you. You have to think the same things about collaborators, right? Somebody might think a paper is critically important, and you may say right now, given these circumstances, it's less important, and you'll have to figure a way to communicate about that. And then we have to think about our expectations of family and friends, what they want and expect of us. So we really need to sit a little bit around expectations. I don't want you to think much about expectations till you watch the wellness video and you think some about the unique circumstances and situations that you're in. Well, like I said at the beginning, this is hard for everyone, but harder for some. And so you really need to have a space and time to allow yourself to appreciate that. And so I think you want to do this prompt and then agree to regularly assess your expectations so that you're not setting yourself up for failure and disappointment. While I think it's fair for all of us to wonder how this will impact our science in the future, we all really should try not to catastrophize about it, because we are all in the same boat of needing to adjust here. Grant organizations are already making changes. Schools are looking at their timing. We're all talking about how we're going to respond to this. And so I want you to set expectations that are realistic, and knowing that right now catastrophizing is playing a part a little bit in the way we view this. So those are some things that I wanted to say about setting expectations for yourself. I'm going to come back to setting expectations or dealing with expectations your PI has for you, but I want to talk just a little bit and very quickly about telework. Let me just start by saying it's an acquired taste, and for some of us, it is a taste we will never acquire. We just will never really enjoy it, but we have to do it right now. Technology is both our friend and our foe, and so we have to control how technology is distracting us right now. For one thing, the news, constant news, is not healthy and not really great for our health and well-being and mental health, but it's also a major distraction. And then we need training to telework effectively. So I want to give you a few telework hacks to consider. Regardless of whether you have an office, you're going to work in the dining room, the living room, the kitchen, or your bedroom, set up something that looks like a workstation. And I think everyone says ideally don't work in the bedroom. For those of you who have roommates, or those of you who are trying to stay away from someone who is in a quarantine, it may be the place you need to work. So just put some tape on the floor, or work to make sure that there's a separation between your bed and space to relax and where you work. I am still commuting to work, and it has really helped. So I go outside, I walk around, I come back in, and I'm commuting both ways, because or else work just fills everything, right? And I do work sometimes when I come home, but there's something about that. Work's over, I'm leaving, I'm taking a walk, and then I come back home. That has made it easier. So try that. It may be a hack that works for you. Hold on to your previous morning routine. Don't run right downstairs and get started. And once you start, think about starting the day with a victory. And by that, I mean do something small. Small and important would be better than small and unimportant, but do something that you can say, wow, I started the day and was productive. Incentivize and reward yourself with good, healthy breaks. Maybe reaching out to some friends. On Zoom, people in my office join the Zoom water cooler, and I reward myself by going into the water cooler to chat with people. If you're like me, you have a lot of need to move, pay attention to that. Those of you who are in lab or used to running from class to seminar to lab to your research group and all around, now suddenly you have a lot smaller space. Get up and walk around. Schedule wellness breaks, and there's a lot on wellness in those videos. Close notifications on apps that distract you, and generally all apps distract us. I know we think we can multitask, but quite frankly, our brain prefers to single task, so we should embrace single tasking. For those of you, and I get a sense from the questions that cognitive distortions are something really that you see getting in the way, just jot them down. Sometimes, we just have to name something, name it to tame it, right? We just name it, we recognize it, and we soften it a little bit. And I talked about images and things. Tack up a picture of a giraffe. Actually, those of you who know me from NIH know that I have many, many giraffes in my office. We actually have many, many giraffes here in our house as well. And then one other telework hack, and I'm not going to talk about these slides, but they come next. That is complete a Finding My Flow log. Some people call this an activity log, but I think it's much more positive to talk about finding your flow. By that, I mean find the times where you work really, really well. Memory is a very, very poor guide, and sometimes if we keep a log for a week, it goes a long way. So your log should be every time you change a task, right? You write it down. You write down what time you started, what you did, and then your mood, whether you were productive, distracted, grouchy, whatever, okay? And I'm gonna give you some examples of what they look like. As you analyze your log, your flow log, you'll look at how often you change tasks, the length of time you spend dealing with disruptions, opening mail, and doing sort of low importance jobs. One of the reasons you want to do that is it turns out if you cluster those things, most of us tend to be much more productive. So instead of opening email regularly, you pause and you open it in a block of time, cluster and block. The other thing is, and I think this is really important, you have to look at your important interruptions right now. If you have family responsibilities and kids at home, you want them to be healthy, and a part of that is giving them time. And while you want to get work done, you also want to take care of your family. And I think that this helps you have a realistic representation of your important interruptions and responsibilities. You want to look at how your energy fluctuates, look at rest and relaxation during the day, and look at the balance between really important high value tasks and less important low value tasks. You don't want to do all high value all day. It can be exhausting every day. There might be a day like that, but you want to mix them a little bit. And it's nice sometimes to compare your activities to what you had hoped to accomplish so that you can modify your goals and do things that might be more realistic. One of the least motivating, resilient things is to end every day saying, God, I got nothing done, which is actually probably a lot of ignoring positive. So it's a whole lot of all or nothing thinking, but it is really demoralizing. So these are not during the pandemic. This is long ago from me. And if you look, at 12:30, I start to note that I'm tired. This was when I finally realized that I had a bad habit of not eating lunch or hydrating for that matter. It turned out it's not just lunch, it's that by then I hadn't had a cup of tea for a long time. I was dehydrated, hungry, hadn't gotten up. So this was an aha moment for me. Here's one from one of the students in my lab, Bill, who's now long gone, working in the Research Triangle Park. And what I noticed from this was that he tended to get stressed, frazzled, and tired, distracted towards the end of the day. And this was a nice chance for him to realize his high efficiency and low efficiency time. I did the same, and I also noticed that my high efficiency time was in the morning, and I've restructured things to exercise and then work, get hard work done early. So you can keep a log and you can figure things out like this, especially if you track your mood, not just the time and activity. There's a technique called the Pomodoro technique where you can, if you get distracted easily, be held accountable, and you can just Google that and read a little bit about it. Part of telework is a mindset. Part of it is learning how to do it effectively. And part of it is appreciating that some days are just easier days than others to telework. But to be effective now is going to mean to figure some of this out for yourself. I want to wrap up and take questions, and I'm going to talk some about setting boundaries and expectations with your PI. And I have probably too many slides to get through this by 4, but I will stay on and answer questions and address things. The honest truth is, to some degree, we all struggle to be assertive, to appropriately voice our wants, our needs, our concerns. And right now, many of you have concerns you want to address with your PIs. We have different communication styles. We have different ways of viewing conflict. And when we mix that together with a significant power differential, it can make it really hard to ask for what we want. And now this will be exacerbated by current conditions, both your stress and their stress. And furthermore, email is a terrible way to communicate because it's totally flat. We can't tell people's intention behind the words. And video conferencing is not the same as talking in person. It's definitely better than email. I have a couple of prompts around assertiveness and difficult conversations because we've learned that from our families and cultures. And in fact, there's this great book for those of you who struggle either to be assertive at all or who realize I'm often too assertive. I really recommend this book, Clash: How to Thrive in a Multicultural World. because it talks about the messages that we receive from our families and cultures drive our primary view of our role in life. And those of us who grew up in independent cultures, our primary focus is on our own needs, opinions, and goals, and it's easier for us to be assertive. But for those of us who grew up in interdependent families and cultures and communities, our primary focus is on supporting the group and maintaining tradition and respecting hierarchy. And I spell that out a little bit more here. Think about it. If you grew up receiving a lot of messages that what you want matters and you should bring it up and talk about it, then being assertive is easy or easier. Remember, power still can make it hard. But if you grew up in interdependent cultures and interdependent communities and you got this message that the group matters and that you're there to support the group, then it's going to be very difficult for you to be assertive. The thing is that, difficult or not, we all need to be able to ask for what we need. We're not assertive at times, sometimes because we believe we don't have a right to be assertive, and that's that cultural and family element that I just talked about, whether that's in general or in a specific situation, and the specific situation is often hierarchy at work. Sometimes we don't always know what we want or need. Sometimes we know exactly what we want, but we're afraid of displeasing others or of not being liked. A friend asks us to do something and we don't want to displease them. We don't want to not to be on the outs, or our PI asks us to do something that we think is really not important for us at the time, but we say, oh, I can't displease him or her. And I think the other one to remember is that many of us haven't learned these skills, so we lack the skills we need to be assertive effectively. And I would venture a guess, because as I look at this list, I realize that at times in my life and career, I've struggled with all of these, that you would also note that you struggle with many of these, if not all of them. Here's a good journal prompt to help you work on that. People ask questions of, what do I do, if my PI jackals on me? What do I do to tell my PI he or she needs to give me more of this or less of this? And the honest truth is, it starts with the self-awareness of, why can't we ask? What are we afraid of by asking? How has this worked and not worked for us in the past? What have we learned from all of it? The beginning of becoming assertive, appropriately assertive, is self-awareness. So I asked you to consider times when you struggled to communicate assertively. I asked you to focus on times when you did well. And then I want you to write about the cognitive distortions that may have come up for you. Because when you put all those things together, I think it may be easier to move forward with developing your assertive communication skills. And this is a learned skill, but it is hard to learn under pressure and when the stakes are high. And so I want you to be realistic and learn something about this during this period, and really reach out to your PIs to talk about the things that really you need to change right now. But I think it's also important to say that these are not instantly learned skills, and it takes a lot of growth mindset to grow in this area. There are 3 books I like to recommend for this. You can possibly check them out for free electronically at libraries. My hope is that they're not very expensive on Amazon. I often tell people I'll drop one in the mail for you, but I can't tell you that right now. But these are 3 books that many students have come back to my office, thrown the book down on my table, and said, thank you, that was really terrific. So I recommend it. Some things that get in the way of us being assertive with our PI or others. It's not just people in authority either. Sometimes we can't be assertive with our friends, our spouses, etc. But these 4 things. Our stress response, right? We sense being assertive as a threat, and remember that triggers our flight, fright, freeze response. So we're acting out of a place of stress. So we have to practice wellness so we can control that. We have to practice mindfulness and take a deep breath so in the moment we don't freeze up. Our cognitive distortions get in the way. First of all, our imposter voice convinces us that we don't know enough. We don't have enough knowledge to even know what we need. And then we catastrophize. We think it's going to go terribly and they're going to fire us in the moment. We mind read and think they're going to say no. We fortune tell together with that catastrophizing towards the future. And sometimes, because we tend to get locked in all or nothing thinking, we don't appreciate that we had some small victories in that conversation, that we got some of what we wanted, but not all. And sometimes some, especially if we focus on the most important things, is really big progress. The other thing is that we struggle to separate impact and intent when facing a challenging interaction. So sometimes somebody says things in a really, really terse way. Their intent was to deliver helpful feedback, but it landed on us with a painful ouch. And so the impact is we feel like we're not a good grad student, like we're an unsuccessful postdoc, but the intent was to help us improve the abstract or to improve our talk or to do the experiment differently. So we struggle to know and separate the impact and intent. And then finally, we are all triggered in different ways. And sometimes as we're having a conversation, somebody uses the "you never do this," or they say something and we question the accuracy of that, and that's a truth trigger. And the minute that happens, we discount everything else because we're focused on the accuracy of that comment. There are also identity triggers. When we feel really passionate about something, when it matters to us a lot, and being a good scientist matters to all of you a lot, when that happens and somebody pokes and gives us feedback about that, it really hurts. And so it's hard for us to be assertive around things that are deeply important for us. That's why it's easy sometimes for some of us to go to the store and be assertive, and then we think, why can't I do that in lab? But it's because that identity matters to us so much. And then there are all kinds of things around relationships with specific people, and without a doubt, our PI, that really triggers us, right? This person has power, we care about what they think, and that can really trigger us, and that trigger drives more stress response. We have to develop an assertiveness toolkit. We have to ask ourselves questions in advance. We have to find people to help us prepare. We have to think about who can add to our safety, especially when we're bringing up something that makes us feel very vulnerable. And we think, well, our PI could just say, fine, leave, right? Or now I won't take you. Sometimes we need to find institutional resources to add to our safety. In terms of coming into work right now, and I'm still getting emails from students, not only at NIH, but across the country about how do I deal with this? I'm afraid to go in, I have to ride the metro. Local and state regulations are helping in that regard. We have been instructed to quarantine, and if you don't feel safe right now, institutional resources, but also these other broader regulations might help. I know some of you are preparing to have conversations with your PIs about their expectations and how this is impacting you, but some of you are having conversations about your actual feeling of safety and going in and having to work. So here's a journal prompt about what you might like to say to your PI right now, or a collaborator, or a partner, or someone in your roommate who's, where you differ on how much you should be practicing physical distancing right now. So what do you want to say about how you're feeling and doing, what the concerns you want? And then I want you to focus on something called your asks. Sometimes people raise concerns, but they don't ask for what they want. Right? So if you're feeling right now like your PI needs to be more flexible about you coming and going during lab meeting because you have to address issues with your family, you need to be clear and say, I'm asking for permission to come and go during lab meeting, or I'm asking that you change lab meeting to this other time, right? I'm asking, right? You need to be clear. In the prompt, I want you to envision a little bit what they will say or do in response to your input and ask, and how you'll move the discussion forward. And then I want you to ask who you're going to talk with and practice with, because when the stakes are high, we don't want to do this without really lining up support and practicing. And I want to wrap up and just reframe a few of the elephants in the room. We talked already about elephants around counseling and mental health. We've talked about elephants around taking care of ourselves. These are unprecedented times, and we have to stop doing things business as usual. We have to stop and take care of ourselves. When we get back to work, we want to be our best selves, and that's going to mean taking care of ourselves right now. And sadly, the reality is many of us are dealing with profound losses of people we love, of opportunities. I mean, the honest truth is these are really unprecedented times. So we need to reframe science comes first to we as a community and as people come first. To be resilient, we have to develop our wellness practice, and we have to do things that bring meaning to our day, our week, our month, and our year. And I want you to think about that through something called a wellness collage. It's a way to identify and talk about things that bring happiness and meaning to your life. And the key takeaway is you should never underestimate those things that make you happy. So here's mine. Open your phone and make one. In the middle there is my wife and son. There I am doing some physical things, art, food, my animals and nature, friends, travel. Some of these things I can't do right now, right? I can't travel right now, but I can Skype with my friends that I've traveled with, or I can spend a little bit of time thinking about what my next trip might be. The other day, I actually pulled an art book off the shelf and looked at some art. We really can find ways to hold on to these things that make us feel good about ourselves. I do think we'll get through this together, but I think we're going to need to be able to ask for help, and asking for help is nearly always hard. And finally, I really do believe you're the generation that will change science for the better, because you logged on to listen. I mean, you realize that this is important. We want to help here at the NIH in the Office of Intramural Training and Education. Send me an email and let me know what will be helpful to you. And I just want to end with this amazing picture. This is what happened at our house today. That big tree behind our house got cut down because it moved in the storm and was pretty dangerous. That's Luis. This was an amazing picture of teamwork. All of the people working together, both to stay safe because of the coronavirus, but also to stay safe because look at the crazy things that they were doing here today. I watched Luis pass by this window many, many times, and he had this look of just focus and determination on his face, and so did everyone on the ground. We are a team. Science is a big team, and we all really, I think, need to channel these kinds of beliefs about working together. So I'm going to answer some more questions. This is my email address, and I gave you the email already. There are a ton of questions here, so I'm going to start. And a good friend of mine from UCLA, Diana, says that she agrees that this is the generation that will change science. So we really do believe this. Many of us really believe this. Somebody here talks about periods of longer setback, that lots of the negative mindsets correlate with difficulties in interactions with advisors, and that really does impact productivity, and appreciating that some of this arises from differences in personality. I think that, and then they go on to say that they believe the Myers-Briggs type indicator or other personality assessments can be helpful. And I believe we are offering soon a workshop. You won't be able to take the MBTI, but we will talk about how personality impacts interactions. And in the feedback workshop that I'm going to do, it's either next week or the week after, I will talk a lot about 4 types of communication styles. For anyone who likes Pomodoro, you can, oh yes, thank you. I meant to mention that there were lots of Pomodoro apps, so thank you, Elizabeth. You can get one apparently on your Fitbit and your Apple Watch, and Elizabeth says it has helped a lot, actually a ton, since starting to work from home. I am a big fan, although I personally can't do 25 minutes and Pomodoro recommends 25. Mine is about 15. Somebody said that using Control H to view browser history helps to see exactly how they spend their desk time. That's Karen And so that's helpful to see. Are you searching the internet and doing work-related things? Are you researching topics? What exactly are you doing? You're welcome. There's a lot of thank yous. I actually respond to all of those. I just collectively say you're welcome, and I'm really glad I got to do it. So I want to address this one from Marin. When I take time out to take care of myself, I feel guilty about not using the time to do things that I should be doing. I would like us all to say, first of all, anytime we hear the word should, we should ask ourselves, is it reasonable? Second of all, to do well, we have to be well. Hard stop. You know, if everything in science was so amazing, I guess I would say, why do we need to stop and take care of ourselves? But harassment has been a part of the scientific enterprise for way too long. We have not been as welcoming to students of color and to women as we can and should be. We have people feeling huge amounts of pressure around reproducibility and rigor. We have so many things in science that are not as good as they could be. And I wonder if some of that is that we haven't embraced the idea that to do well, we have to be well. And more data is telling ourselves that. So I think when you take time out to take care of yourself, instead of feeling guilty, you should say, wow, I'm making an investment in my future. And I'm not advocating that we take care of ourselves at the exclusion of work. I'm saying that we take care of ourselves so we can work, and so we can take care of people, and so we can do science the right way. Grace says that she repeatedly overestimates what can be accomplished in a given time frame. Me too, and I'm sure everybody else is saying me too, me three, me four. I think that there are two approaches to this. One is the approach I take, which is I overestimate. I get to the end of the day and I say, well, I did pretty well. It is what it is. I do something called 3 good things, and I do one of them on the way home, and on purpose, I point out something I got accomplished, that I did accomplish, that I was satisfied about. And so I say it is what it is, and I just let it go. I think I'm good about prioritizing so that I tend not to leave the most important thing that doesn't happen. So that's one strategy, and that doesn't work for everyone because some people can't say it is what it is and let it go. And if you're that kind of person, then you need to know, and you need to cut 20, you need to figure, I have to cut 25%. Am I a 25%er? Am I a halfer? Am I a 10%er? i.e., how much do I overestimate? And you need to do the math and do that. How should we take this advice about setting expectations? I have a toddler. It's even more complicated. People on my committee also have kids. I think that it would be nice to send an email to everyone saying, I know, I'm assuming, Andrew, that maybe there was an expectation of a committee meeting, maybe an email. I always say build the bridge. Start your email or your conference by building a bridge. Acknowledge that you're all working in this together, that you're trying to accomplish something. So you build the bridge and connect. And then you raise the issue. So I hope everyone is well and juggling both work and childcare. I know we were going to have a committee meeting, and I imagine that that's as complicated for you right now as it is for me, given the fact that all of our kids are home. I'm open to suggestions. Here are some of my thoughts, something like that. So you build a bridge, you bring up the issue, you make your ask, you solidify the bridge, and you ask for input. Okay, that's sort of a little bit of a model that I would suggest. There's a lot of people commenting about the idea that you will be the people who change science, and I truly, truly hope that that's the case. What about trainees already suffering from burnout due to past experiences? Do you have extra suggestions to guide through this current situation? I think that talking to someone, an institutional leader, a program director, somebody in your graduate school office or postdoc office, about whether a short leave during this period might be wiser than trying to accomplish things is one thing that I would do. Another thing that I would do is really use this time to develop a modified wellness practice, because sometimes, like, my wellness generally involves going to Orange Theory, and I can't do that right now, so I have to modify it. And you'll have things like that as well. I love to go out dancing. And you can't, but you can get onto Zumba and dance, because people in the OITE have been doing that 2 days a week, and it seems that they're loving it. So I think you could use this time to put together a modified wellness practice. I also have helped several trainees find a therapist who was willing to start with them remotely. If you're at NIH, I'm happy to help. If you're somewhere else, talk to someone you trust at your institution. Maybe someone in your student health can talk with you, see if there are some groups. I think that using this time to address the burnout a little bit might be very, very helpful. Do we carry our cognitive distortions into another field or job? So I catastrophize at work, but I catastrophize worse at home. I think we carry it from job to job. We carry it from work to home. I do think, and this person, EP, goes on to say, I think sometimes it's linked to the very stressful environment in science, and that I would feel better in another job. And I think the honest truth is that these are a part of the human condition. And while the stress of science, I think we each have a different sort of tolerance level for stress, right? So I'm not discounting that you might feel better in another job. It's also possible that it would be another environment or another career within the scientific realm. I'm not discounting that, that's possible, but I want to say that these cognitive distortions won't go away. I also like to encourage people before they leave, and sometimes I say we beat the love of science out of all of you, and it makes me really sad. Sometimes when I talk to somebody before, when they're thinking of leaving, I say, try taking care of yourself. Try some self-care and see if stress management helps you deal with the parts of this you don't love, so that you can really focus on the parts that you do love. So that's a complicated thing to answer in a question like this, but I hope that that helps a little bit. This is a question from Ali, a hypothetical. One person has the opportunity to travel and present your work, but they didn't contribute to, and there's it goes on for a long time. And I think it gets around equity and equality and fairness. And I'm gonna suggest maybe that you email me. My email was in the right here. It's still up on the screen, because it seems like there's some heavy stuff there that would be worth discussing. I have not been able to bring myself to work productively. I feel sad and worried and can't focus. Of course, I mean, I think we all do. I think this is the most sad. You know, it's interesting. I remember I was an adult during 9/11, and I remember thinking nothing like this will ever happen again. And, you know, this is a once in a lifetime thing. And then I have come to appreciate that there's really sorrow and tragedy all around. And this is another kind of 9/11 in many, many ways. So we all feel really vulnerable and insecure. We have no model for how to deal with this. So I think that the first thing is to focus on self-care and stress management, and to put aside the concern about how your supervisor or colleagues will think about you, and maybe even being open, not too open. We don't need to share everything happening, but sending an email to your PI and saying, I just want to share that I'm really struggling right now, and I'm working on my stress management. I want to do well at work, but I can't yet focus. That might help. That doesn't mean that they will respond incredibly well, but sometimes we just feel good for being assertive and making it clear what's happening for us. And so I would encourage you to use those prompts towards the end about talking to your PI to see whether you think that would feel good or not. Question is, can imposter fears develop from disappointments? I think that generally imposter fears develop from a variety of things, some of which are the environment we're in. I think sometimes perfectionism and perfectionism drives imposter fears. And if you talk about disappointments from the perspective of I wasn't perfect and I didn't have the best possible outcome, then yes, I think perfectionism can drive imposter fears. When is it an appropriate time to communicate your expectations or needs to your mentor? And I think the answer is whenever you think not communicating is helping you or hurting you. I think you need to ask yourself, is not sharing this helping or hurting? And I think often it is actually hurting. I think we fear the response so much that it's hard to be assertive. And I understand that's justified. People can behave very, very poorly. But sometimes the outcome of not communicating is worse than the outcome of communicating. And so I would encourage you to ask if that hiding right now is helping or hurting, and to then find some people you trust to talk it through. How to stop feeling guilt and get back to feeling motivated. Again, I think that some of the keys to that are in the resilience, in the wellness workshop offered last week. Some of the keys to that are talking to friends, getting on Skype with I talked about that prompt about who are the people that really support you and help you feel good. I think that we all need to let go of getting so much done right now and focus on taking care of ourselves and others. How do we remind our PIs of boundaries during this time? I took on a relevant dependent during COVID-19. My PI expect us to be available all the time. So first I want to ask if that's mind reading, right? Because sometimes we think our PI expects us to be online all the time, and our PI is not actually thinking about us all the time or expecting us to be online all the time. But the honest truth is sometimes they are. And if that's the case, then, and you've gotten some emails of I emailed you and I expected a response in 10 minutes and I didn't get one. This might be a time to take a really deep breath, line up some support, and send back an email that lays out your reality, which is clearly different than their reality, right? And I know that it's so hard to think about doing that because you imagine that your PI has all the power and you have none of the power. But remember that locus of control, cognitive distortion. And while they have power, you also have power to say no. And sometimes we have to say no. And if you can't be there all the time right now because there's a dependent in your household that needs you more, you have to weigh saying no in one area or the other, and getting as much support as you can to do that would be really important. I don't want to minimize how hard that is. In this time of heightened anxiety, how do we separate real fear from catastrophizing? For example, what if we're furloughed, we can't make rent, we don't get paid, we can't make rent. These are possible scenarios in the current situation. Yeah, they are. I think that universities, and I assume I'm mostly talking to students and postdocs at universities, I think universities have been pretty proactive in looking at the most vulnerable people in their community. But the honest truth is right now we have a lot to be worried about, and all around us people are losing jobs and people are incredibly vulnerable. And so I think maybe we don't worry right now about whether this is catastrophizing or justified, but we acknowledge that it really makes it hard to get anything else done, and we try to find ways to put it in perspective. That we try to think about what is available to us right now and how to really deal with this in the best way possible. And finally, we remember that the first part of resilience is people. And I cannot stress enough that talking to people about how you feel is the best thing you can do about it. Now, sometimes we talk to one person and catastrophize and double down. And I don't actually mean only talk about the news. In fact, right now, I think we should be talking about the news less. And we should be talking about our families and support and things we love and food and music more. And so I think that that's a little bit the answer to that. And I hope that there are some groups and resources at your school and in your community to help with that. As you grow as an adult and recognize your values and beliefs about what is a meaningful life, you realize that they don't align with those around you in this field. What do you do? Because that really does drive imposter fears, and you really think, I really don't belong. And so how do you combat this thinking? So first of all, I would like to say that there is no one monolithic scientist. There are many of us who have incredibly balanced, well-integrated lives, who are happy to be both good humans and good scientists. There's a range of ways to be and do science, and sometimes we've just seen one or two ways. That said, I made that comment about how you will be the generation to change this because I think you are really bringing new values into this workspace, and I love you for doing that. And so I think it's a combination of things. Somebody else?
Sharon, it's Lori. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up because I know you have another meeting.
Okay, thanks. So thank you. I think it's a combination of not giving up on what your values are, finding mentors and advisors moving forward that share those values. So, we always pick graduate labs and postdoc labs based on the science, and maybe it should be based on the people first, science second. I don't even think we think about people and values in the environment until like fourth or fifth. And maybe that's one way we do this. And so I think it's a combination of things. So Lori is right. I do really have to go to another meeting. I'm just scanning to see if there's anything that I think is really important. And I'm going to end by addressing this very heavy and hard question. And that is, how do we bounce back quickly after we lose someone that we love? Whether it's because they were ill for a long time or because of coronavirus. And I think the impact of grief on our ability to thrive at work is a very big topic. We have to appreciate that we each grieve in different ways. We have to appreciate that therapy is a really important adjunct to helping us sort out ways forward during grief. And we have to appreciate that it's not business as usual. And the honest truth is, and we'll send this out, there was an article one of the career counselors posted that said right now as a world, what we're experiencing is grief and anticipatory grief, right, about what's going to happen. And so while that's a heavy way to end, I think it's also an important way to end, because if you think about the grand scheme of what we're living through, a paper submitted a little bit late, an email from a PI that has a little bit too much jackal language, some mistakes that we made, a missed deadline. Like, I think if we put this all into perspective of what we're dealing with right now, I hope we can all be kinder and softer and gentler with each other and with ourselves, because we desperately need that right now. And so with that, I'm going to take a deep breath and apologize that I didn't finish all of the questions. And I'm going to say, together with Diana, who seconded it, and all of the faculty members and scientists across this country who are very, very worried for the future of our trainees and who want you to be resilient through all of this, that we care about you and that we're here to help and to talk and to be good role models. And we will do our very, very best to do that as this moves forward. So with that, stay home, take care, wash your hands, and take care of yourselves. Thank you all very, very much, and be well. Hey, Lori, I still don't know how to shut it.
I gotcha.
Yeah, thank you. I really owe you.
See you later.
Thank you.